Hi, welcome back to Health Score. Today we are moving to the section on your numbers or biometrics. And let's start with an introduction. In the biometrics section, you will see 7 topics, and they're all measurements. Almost all of them require lab tests. 5 of them require lab tests. Then there's the body weight to calculate your BMI, body mass index, and blood pressure. So you'll likely need to go to your primary care doctor to get these labs if you haven't had them done already, and to check and have your blood pressure checked. These are measurements that have been identified in the medical literature to have optimal targets. And when you achieve those targets, there's evidence that you have a longer lifespan. That is the criteria for inclusion of these measurements. There can be controversy over body mass index, but the fact is BMI correlates with long-term health, longevity, and risk of disease. There are fads about measuring minerals and different esoteric proprietary substances in the body. Those don't have the large studies behind them to show that that they matter. These are the numbers that matter. Next, all of them indicate the impact of behaviors in previous sections. So in previous sections, we talked about psychological health, we talked about sleep, we talked about physical activity, we talked about diet. And those were assessed using questionnaires about your behaviors. This section deals with measurements, and the measurements, where you stand in these measurements, is almost exclusively determined by how closely you adhere to the behaviors recommended in previous sections. So if you are following the optimal diet outlined previously, if you are active and your physical activity and sleep and your psychological health are all optimal, then more than likely this section will be just a celebratory lap, but nothing you'll have to change. On the other hand, if any of these values are abnormal, it's an opportunity to revisit the previous sections on diet and exercise, mental health, and sleep. Next, the targets here are based on clinical trials, not on society guidelines. So when you get a lab result like a hemoglobin A1C, which is the average blood sugar, the laboratory will report a normal range, usually under 5.7. I'm using a cutoff of 5, so my recommendation is more aggressive than what's reported in the lab, because there's large studies to show that an A1C of 5 or greater confers a risk of premature death. So I'm not going by conventional standards. I'm going by clinical trials, evidence in large populations for what values for these measures are optimal. I'm also not following clinical guidelines. Clinical guidelines are what doctors are given to tell them when to intervene with patients based on their cholesterol, for example. These are largely determined by when medication is appropriate. And society guidelines, clinical guidelines, give short shrift to lifestyle behavior change for optimizing cholesterol, for example. So their guidelines usually are to start lifestyle modification and consider medication at an LDL cholesterol of 130. Well, the evidence is that an LDL cholesterol of 100 or more is where you need to start working. But because there isn't a medication that's recommended at that low at 100 or under 130, it's not something that doctors are encouraged to discuss with patients. But because we're here to optimize your health and ideally and most likely avoid even needing medications, I'm going to point out the targets that confer the optimal health and give you the best chance of avoiding the need for medication at all. And finally, just to reiterate, the most effective approach in the medical literature are behavioral interventions. So there isn't a pill that can get you to target with less side effects than is the behaviors of healthy diet, physical activity, sleep, and psychological health. So it's not that when I make these, when I'll be describing how to reach these targets, it's not that I have a bias against medication. It's that I have a bias towards whatever is most effective. And rarely is medication necessary once you optimize your diet, your physical activity, your psychological health, and your sleep. So in summary, we are going to be delving into biometrics in this section. There are 7 factors to optimize. These are the downstream effects of healthy or unhealthy lifestyle. For many, this will be a pat on the back to affirm that you are following a healthy diet. For some, it will be a chance to revisit the diet, lifestyle, physical activity, sleep, and psychological health sections. The targets here are more aggressive than you'll see elsewhere because we're here to optimize health, not determine when to start medication. And the most effective approaches we'll be discussing are the things in your control and don't come in a bottle. I look forward to going on this journey with you, and we'll get started in the next section. Thank you.